knows them well.
Be a question of short range or long range missile, really, isn't it? So, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. And so I want to talk to that amendment just to understand, Mr. Chairman, on page 40 in the refined criteria, the second to last bullet point in number 4, is it meant by the mover and seconder that we need, it's got here, are in close proximity to major existing or emerging employment areas? I was sort of just wondering if that's already there, does this just mean that the mover and seconder just want numbers next to it? Or I'm quite concerned that that's quite prescriptive and may be difficult to actually define, just as Councillor Fletcher says we don't know if we're in a bubble, you know, and if the SHA isn't near an employment business land, you know, how do we be so specific? That's my concern, is I think it's well defined here. It's in one of the strategic location criteria. And I just wonder if...
Through Mr Chair, I just wonder whether we might be able to take account of both Councillor Fletcher and Quack's and Cooper's concerns by looking at that bullet point that talks about are in close proximity to major existing or emerging employment areas, that we just add the words after that, taking account of average commute times.
Sure. I think
Yep.
that's sure.
Councillors Fletcher and Quacks, would that
Yeah,
satisfy your concern? So the point is made, and we're aware that it's already there, but you wanted that further refinement about not just proximity, but actually how to get to that, or the time to get that to that employment.
Yeah, and look, thank you for that, Ria, because I think that pretty, you know, from my point of view, and I defer to Councillor Fletcher on this as well, but that would satisfy, I think, or it meets a requirement, or it meets the intent of the amendment that we've put up, or the additional amendment that we put up. So it's just a further refinement of what it actually means to be within close proximity of emerging or existing employment areas. So if we add the words commute times, or add some reference to commute times, average commute times, I think that would
And likely travel times by whatever mode, and that's just...
Well, yeah, I think the commute times that we have available to us covers all modes.
Okay.
That's why it's in there.
Members, I think...
Mr Chairman, I just want to welcome Ree's sensible suggestion in terms of pathway forward. As we articulated, there was absolutely no intention to devalue the officer's recommendations on this, and I think that this actually gives us a measure of comfort.
Councillor Cooper, did you want to just finish that off? You're fine.
well, I guess the thing is we can never actually say how many, you know, it's pretty difficult, but I think that makes it in line with the other parts of this, where it talks about distances from train stations, transport nodes, etc. Puts a little bit of tightness around it. Thank you.
Okay, members, maybe it's we'll just possibly frame something that the chair and the deputy chair review those further refinements, and then you'll see it come back for endorsement at the
So I guess there's just no
body.
need for an amendment now.
Councillor Penrose.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Mine was along the same line as what you've just been discussing there. Look, and without relitigating what I spoke at the workshop yesterday, and picking up on Councillor Quacks's comment in regards to this process, it's a given really. I mean to say, my understanding through this whole SHA process was that you know, we had a number of criteria, whether it's wastewater, stormwater, reticulated water, transport, jobs was one of the key and prominent ones that we had to be really particular about. But on saying that, some of these are outside our realm, as we know, as I spoke about yesterday, and Councillor Quack enlightened about Bremner Road. You know, Drury South project's really around the government. So, you know, some things are out of our control and need to back us up on. So, but I think going forward on it, this will cover off nicely.
Thank you, Councillor Penrose. Just for Councillor Brewer's and others' benefit, we will be having a workshop on the future urban land supply strategy in October, so it'll be coming by us. Just a question of my own, and we did have probably a very a cursory introduction to this yesterday. acknowledge that it wasn't an in-depth, and it was not intended to be an in-depth yesterday. So we're just taking a little bit of extra time here today. Just on page 28, or David, sorry, whoever. In the earlier resolutions, we referred to other infrastructure. We referred to, I think, healthcare and communications, but they're not there now, though education is. Is there a reason why they've been taken out?
Through Mr Chair, we have always considered health needs, and we've looked at the way in which district health boards operate. They operate, for example, in terms of their hospitals, very much on a sub-regional basis as opposed to a more local basis, and they have a modus operandus of also trying to have a prevention rather than cure scenario, so a decentralisation of health officials. Now, we have tried to obtain, specific data on that in terms of number of GPs and those sorts of things, and on occasions looked at where the particular local health facilities are. But we've taken, I suppose, that overall strategic understanding of how health facilities are provided for. So that would be the main reason.
Okay, and telecommunications, I think no one's going to build anything without
and
being
we'd
connected.
certainly do that on subdivision and through the consenting process.
That's taken care of. And my other question of 3 questions is page 31 on yield, the 50 dwelling yield. My concern there was in the brownfields area where that can be a little bit harder to accomplish. Did you consider a lower number for, say, minimum yields in the brownfields area?
Mr Chair, I don't think the 50 is precluding a lower number, and that's what David was saying before. So we would look at each circumstance, and these criteria do allow that discretion. For apartment buildings, for example, it could be anywhere from 30 up on one site, and so they would meet that yield of, getting up towards the 50. We're just trying to indicate that we could have multiple small SHA requests, individual sites, and at this stage in the accord process, we don't think that necessarily is the most efficient and effective use of staff time in terms of the due diligence and the effort. And so we're trying to encourage a greater scale even within the brownfield areas.
So our earlier resolution of 16 April referred to the strategically important 50 minimum, but then it went on or. There was an or. So it was strategically important and 50, and that's carried over. But then there was an or, exemplary, that meet the objectives of the Auckland Plan. And you're saying that that is still embedded in this criteria, though it's not in specific words, but there is room for that to be enabled.
Through Mr Chair, there is the discretion there. I'm just wondering whether we need to add. I'm just going to just double check the wording. So I'm looking at the moment on page 31 and 32. We've got, in considering this criterion, the councillors may consider any relevant information. So we could add in exemplar or similar wording, Catherine. I don't think that would be a problem. If we just want to make it in that little note underneath on page, I'm looking at page 31 at the moment. Bring up some of those wordings, Councillor Darby, that you're referring to and just add into that.
Is there a willingness to carry that over? It was in our resolution, and I've just observed that it's those exemplar developments, and they have to be really high quality. They're the ones I'm referring to of a lower yield than 50 in the brownfields.
If I could assist there.
Catherine.
Turning to page 34, looking at criteria 9, which has to do with the quality of the development. You'll see on the left-hand side of the column there where the April resolution is reflected there as a preference for requests that are exemplary, and that's translated into the considerations around the quality of the development.
Yep, and I read that too, and I thought there also needed to be that exemplar reference under yield, just as personally, I think it needs to be beefed up in that area.
It's not going to matter.
Is there a willingness amongst the meeting to just beef that area up?
We don't want shonky stuff.
I'm hearing yes.
Stuff.
And then last point, on page 33, I notice under reference to brownfields, we've got the zones mentioned there, but it does not mention for brownfields, it doesn't mention town centre. But if you go over to the page to 8B, it does mention town centre. So brownfields, why is there no reference to 8A applying to town centre, or have I misread it?
Councillor, through the chair, I'm just currently looking at page 33. There's a reference to town centre on that page there. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, under the middle column though,
Yep.
there's a list there. It does say town centre there, it just doesn't, and so what's carried over into attachment D are not the left-hand column, but it's the middle and the right-hand column, correct? And in carrying that over, 8A does not reference town centres. 8A doesn't reference it under the centre column.
Through Mr. Chair, the original wording when we looked at attachment C, those zones were the zones that were in the Auckland Housing Accord. Town centre may be allowed, but it wasn't one of the ones that we saw as predominantly residential to start with, which was really what the premise of the Accord based the zoning on. I'm just going to go to the right page for attachment 4 on that. I'm just trying to find it.
And just in response to that, Ree, if that's the case, why is it mentioned under 8B then?
Because there's always discretion, and there have been some town centres, I'm thinking of the Northcote special housing area, where that was put in as part of the special housing area because it was surrounded by residential, and also the height limit still was complying with the housing legislation of 6-storey, where we wouldn't put any town centre in that had a higher height limit, for example. But I'm just trying to find sorry, there's so many pages here. What page were you on, D? The number D.
It's possible town centres there are unintentionally. I think we need to have a close look at it because if there is a difference between them, it's probably unintended, and we just need to have a close look at it.
So there's a possibility that town centre could be added into the listing of the centre, or
take it out of the other one. But it wasn't a target zone in the Accord. I think the purpose of this clause is really to identify those target zones. Town centre wasn't one of them, so it's possible we should take town centre out.
Okay, I'll live with that. Any other? I've got Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of very quick questions. One is a mention of the fact that there is ability for creation of housing can actually be the driver to create the infrastructure. And sometimes the amalgamation or the conglomeration of different housing blocks in an area can actually build the infrastructure going forward. So that's sort of covered off here. And the other one is a cross-border infrastructure. So on Monday I was with Waikato District Council, and they, Pokeno, Tuakau, Wharata and Huntly, talking, probably 2,500 houses over the next 30 years. And I know we can't influence them at all, but that has an immediate effect on infrastructure in the south, motorways, roading, and so forth. So is there anything in our formation of SHAs and these criteria that we can use that effect of over the boundary effects upon us?
Mr. Chair, we've always had consideration to the Auckland Plan, as you know, and the Auckland Plan does talk about interregional relationships, and we do liaise closely with our colleagues in other districts in terms of those boundary influences, but whether or not that's necessary to put anything in this criteria, I don't think so. I mean, we've got strategic locations, so in a sense we can look at that, and we are looking at what the zonings of the unitary plan are and have taken into account, in a sense, interregional issues through that.
So I know that they are having the talks. What I was not quite available of, the amalgamation of those combined 4 areas alone is going to have a big knock-on effect to our infrastructure requirements.
And certainly, when we're working on infrastructure, those interregional relationships are important, and I've just forgotten the name, but the Strategic Alliance, the Upper North Island one, for example, is a mechanism, a vehicle to make sure that those matters are covered.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Important point that, actually. Councillor Brewer?
I just wonder if it's worth an addition, given that we are putting a preference there for higher yielding brownfield sites, Mr Chair, given that brownfields in the past, we've been looking at SHAs of, 6, 8, 10 dwellings, that maybe we add something for the sake of ourselves and local boards, that given a preference for higher yielding brownfield sites, that early and extensive consultation with local boards and local councillors remains a priority for the HPO, because as we know, 5 dwellings compared to 50 dwellings, when you're fast tracking and limiting notification, everything else is going to be a lot more problematic for us potentially than putting 5 dwellings on a quarter acre section and calling it an SHA.
Okay, is there a...
Oh,
are you hooking this off a particular part of the criteria, or is it a separate?
I would just drop this right at the bottom as an M at the bottom. That's a catch-all.
And this is a check. This is
check.
The political oversight.
This is just to say, yes, we're going for high-yielding brownfields sites potentially. The exemplary ones we don't need to worry about because that's all. And that we're going to make not an extra effort, but we're going to HPO will continue the strong and close consultation with local boards. Just noting that these are potentially more problematic at a constituent level.
So you're particularly focusing on the 50 pluses.
Yeah, but just say higher yielding. Yeah.
And is that brown and green?
Well, I've just put brownfields,
Okay.
given that that's the preference in this criteria.
David or Reid, do you have a comment on that and how you might address that, if you'd want to address that?
I think that's, you could see that as a process enhancement, and certainly we would respond to that to our best effort.
Okay.
We'll
frame some words up. Yep. I think what we might do is we might go to some other items and then just refine the motion that's on the floor at the moment, if that's okay with members. Are there any other questions at this stage? Otherwise, we're going to just, with Mr Quinn and the Secretariat, just frame the motion up so that it reflects this meeting today. And we might just go to, I think, some procedural items. So if it's no further questions. So when we come back, we will just be looking at the motions on the board and then voting on them, or having if there's any further debate. I'm open to that as well. So maybe if we can just, while the staff are doing that, do you mind?
Break.
Yeah. Welcome, Dean.
Do you want to take a break for 5 minutes because we have to go into public excluded?
Let's just take a break. I think so it is only 5 members if you want to take a coffee.
Darby's one on the exemplary. That's the only one that we've really got to worry about now. I think the other ones we've got, don't we? So he was